The 4 players I'd sign for Manchester United in 2025, 3 of Amarim's key players I would potentially sell to upgrade upon, who I would move on from the current squad, and the youth players I would promote, all coming up in this video. So I have changed my mind over the last few weeks, and if you do want to see my unreleased draft of the video, as well as some of my other unreleased videos over the past few months which I never put out, you can sign up to my Patreon for $1.50 a month. I'll leave it linked in all the usual places. So Manchester United should have a net budget of around £100 million at least to spend in 2025. I'd bring back Alvaro Fernandez in January for his buyback clause of £16 million, and then try to move on both Malacia and Shaw in the summer. Surely we can get £15 million for Malacia if he gets some game time over the second half of the season, and maybe £10 million for Luke Shaw if he can stay fit for longer than it takes me to finish a shit. Eriksen, Maguire, Lindelof and Johnny Evans if he doesn't stay on as a coach, all leaving on frees. I wouldn't be opposed to keeping Maguire if Amarim wanted him for squad depth, as I do think he suits that central centre-back role quite well, but it would have to be on a 1-year contract at most, and half of his £9.8 million a season salary. But with Euro being the understudy at central centre-back to De Ligt, Kokonki the understudy to Lisandro Martinez, and Dalot capable of filling in at right-sided centre-back for Mazraoui if needed, if Euro or De Ligt aren't used there, I think we should be alright. Just let Casemiro go to Saudi on a free to get his full £18 million a season salary off of the books. Antony, surely we can get £20 million at least for that geezer. We are getting another £25 million for Sancho at the end of the season. Toby Collier needs a loan into Europe, somewhere where he can improve his line-breaking passing and his press resistance, maybe a lower table Eredivisie or Portuguese Primeira Liga club. Ethan Wheatley and Harry Amas I could see doing very well at championship clubs, and if Bayindir and Heaton want to leave then they can. And so we should be able to raise at least £70 million off rip at the start of the window. But who would be the 3 signings that I would look to bring in as quickly as possible at the start of the window? Well, before I get into that, if you want to check out any of the current season jerseys, go over to Jersey FIFA. They've also got a variety of different club and international retro shirts as well. You can use code Atlantis at checkout for a discount. A link will be in my Instagram bio, which I will leave linked in the description. So straight away I'm signing Theo Hernandez and Jeremy Frimpong for what I would estimate would cost a combined £75 to £80 million, likely £45 million for Frimpong and 30 to 35 for Theo, who will be in the last year of his Milan contract. And even though in a previous video I spoke about how Tijani Reinders would probably be the most realistic central midfield option for United to sign cost-wise, because I've abandoned my decision to sign Victor Gyökeres, I'd go and drop £60 to £65 million on Adam Walton, taking our expenditure to £150 to £160 million, and a net spend of between £80 to £90 million. Now I would be willing to make other signings later on in the window, but it would depend on selling 2 or 3 of our key players in order to raise funds, to then upgrade with players who may or may not be available this summer. And I'll tell you who those players are in just a minute, but first, let me detail why with these 4 signings, Amarim's Manchester United could genuinely challenge for the title next season. So in net, I think we actually could potentially have the best ball-playing keeper in the world by next season. I think Andre Onana is better than Ederson, Alisson is always injured nowadays, and the only keepers in world football at the moment that I can see challenging him for that number 1 spot come next season are David Raya at Arsenal, ter Stegen at Barcelona, and obviously Thibaut Courtois, but I don't think you'd necessarily categorise him as a ball-playing keeper. When it comes to the back line, Mazraoui and Martinez either side of De Ligt is a phenomenal back 3, both in terms of individual ability, in and out of possession, as well as having stylistic balance. But our depth and long-term potential is also incredible, with both Kokonki and Euro being players who I think can develop into elite level centre-backs, both capable of defending space and 1v1s in a high line, which is crucial to Amarim's system, as well as being able to play in the centre of a back 3 or as a wide centre-back on their strongest side, and having De Ligt, Martinez and Mazraoui ahead of them in the pecking order is probably best for their development, as I think it's too early to rely on either of them as starters for the entire season. I think Dalot, like Mason Mount further up the pitch, can be Ruben Amarim's tactical Swiss Army knife, a very well-rounded skill set capable of playing in multiple positions, from right-sided centre-back, right or left wing-back, and even being able to do a job as a left-sided centre-back or in central midfield if it is absolutely needed as well. Our options at wing-back also look amazing. You've got Frimpong and Theo who can provide the powerful ball-carrying ability and electric pace down the outside of the opposition system going down the line, whilst Amad and Dalot can provide greater playmaking ability, playing from the opposite side to their strongest foot, and we've seen how effective both can be be in these roles in the first few games of Amorim's tenure. But Alvaro Fernandez shouldn't be forgotten about either, as not only is he an ideal backup and long-term replacement for Teo, but his physicality, athleticism and defensive positional understanding suggests to me that he could even be used as an offensive alternative to Lisandro Martinez at left-sided centre-back during some games as well. So across that back five, United look insanely strong, both in terms of starters, squad depth, long-term potential and tactical versatility. In central midfield, Mainu and Walton would be starters, and with both being in their early 20s, that's literally our midfield set for the next decade, barring injuries of course, and with Manuel Ugarte there as well, he can be Amorim's Kante or Makalele. Someone who can come in for specific games or during specific periods of games as a destroyer in the midfield, having the necessary aggression, tenacity and ball-winning ability to be incredibly effective when breaking up attacks in the middle third and as a counter-pressing threat in the opposition's half. Mason Mount could also be used in the double pivot alongside either Adam Walton or Ugarte as a Kobbie Mainu alternative, as well as in that right-sided half space further up, and then I'd also have Sekou Kone and Dan Gore as squad depth options in central midfield, depending on how they do in the second half of the season and of course their injuries. In the front three we're also stacked for talent. I think Rashford and Xerxes work perfectly together, with Højlund a different type of option at centre forward. Bruno Fernandes is obviously going to be Amorim's key creator in the front three, but then you've also got Mount and Ahmad, who could also be used in that right-sided half space as well, with Garnacho being Rashford's long-term replacement as the inside forward, making movements in behind the back line and being a goal-scoring threat alongside Bruno, Ahmad or Mount as the creators in the front three. I also think that come next season, Chido Obi Martin will be ready to come in as the third choice centre forward option, getting some minutes from the bench as well as starting in cup competitions as well. And so just with those four signings, as well as promoting the likes of Kakonki, Kone, Dan Gore and Chido Obi Martin, I think Amorim has a squad that is at least capable of challenging for the title going into February and March. But there are a few upgrades that we could make to improve the squad further, but this would depend on cost and availability of certain players, as well as selling some of our key players in order to raise funds for upgrades. So who are those players? Well, before I tell you that, a quick reminder, if you do want access to my in-game Instagram group chat, I'll leave my Patreon linked in all the usual places. So the players that Manchester United could potentially upgrade upon are Lisandro Martinez, Marcus Rashford and maybe Diogo Dalot. Now, even though I am a big fan of all of these three players and would definitely be happy to keep them next season, I see squad building in a different way to most of the United fan base. Most of the fan base becomes far too attached to individual players. For example, let's say for whatever reason, United had the opportunity to sign Lamine Yamal, but had to sell Ahmad in order to do so. I think a lot of the fan base would say no to that, just because of how much they love Ahmad, which I do too, but that's absurd. The way you function as a top club is by making decisions without emotion. Real Madrid loved Mesut Ozil in 2013, but selling him to Arsenal and signing Gareth Bale was obviously a net positive for the squad, as selling Ahmad and signing Yamal would be. Even though obviously this is just an example and not a transfer that is realistic. But crucially, I'm not just selling these players and then looking for their replacements. A lot of people still have Ten Hag derangement syndrome and want to sell Rashford without even having an upgrade in mind. Ademola Lookman and Leroy Sané have been players who've been suggested, but neither are upgrades on Rashford. Both are around the same age, and Sané has worse attitude problems than Rashford apparently does. So at that point, you're just pushing an agenda that doesn't even improve the squad. If you are selling Rashford, it has to be for a ready-made elite level, bordering on world-class player. Vinicius Jr. might be available when the Real Madrid dressing room inevitably implodes and they have to pick between him or Mbappe, but realistically I can't see that happening until 2026 at the earliest. Leao has been just as inconsistent as Rashford over the past year or so, and hasn't had a peak as high as Rashford in the last few seasons either, and is going to cost significantly more than we could get for selling Rashford. Nico Williams is not the type of wide attacker we need stylistically, being more of a natural winger than an inside or a wide forward, and if you look at his output this season or even last season, I don't see how you can make the argument that he would be an upgrade on Rashford, certainly in terms of output in the final third. Kvaratskhelia is a player that I do like, but I don't think he's the right kind of attacker that we would need if we were replacing Rashford. As a Bruno Fernandes replacement maybe, but if we are replacing Rashford, we need an inside or a wide forward, who is primarily more of a goal scorer than a creator. And so for me, let's say PSG or Bayern Munich were willing to spend 50 to 60 million pounds on Rashford, which I think is the minimum we should get for selling Rashford, given that players like Omar Mamouche and Nico Williams would be available for between 45 to 55 million pounds this summer, then Alexander Isak at Newcastle would be my number one option, assuming Vinicius, Rodrigo or Rafinha aren't available or attainable, which I don't think they will be this summer. I'd value Isaac at around £90 million, so you could offer Newcastle some sort of swap deal. £30 million plus Rashford, or just sell Rashford to PSG or Bayern Munich, which would probably work better for everyone involved, and then use that money to bring in Isaac. For Lisandro Martinez, I'd only sell him if we could get Bastoni. Even though I do like Hincapié, Lukeba and Branthwaite, I don't think any of them would be an upgrade on Martinez. And for Dalot, I'd only consider selling him if we could use him as a part of a deal to get Vinicius or Rodrigo from Real, or Rafinha from Barcelona, and I just see all of those deals as highly unlikely, at least in the summer of 2025 anyway. Actually, thinking about it, I've changed my mind again. Given that Gyökeres is supposedly available for around £63 million in the summer, to me it's only logical to move Højlund on and use that money to bring Gyökeres in. I think we could get at least £60 million for Højlund, as I think teams like Atletico Madrid, Napoli when they sell Osimhen, RB Leipzig if they sell Sesko, Inter if they sell Thuram, and potentially PSG as well, would all snap our hands off if they could get Højlund for that price. But even if it was, say, £50 million, which I think is probably a bit too low, but for argument's sake, let's say £50 million plus some add-ons taking it over to £70 million if certain accomplishments are met, then upgrading Højlund with Gyökeres for £10 million more is 100% worth it, as simply having Gyökeres up front instead of Højlund would significantly improve our attack, with the game against Arsenal being a perfect example. We were able to play through Arsenal's press, arguably the best pressing system in the league, until we got to the forward line. Højlund has huge potential, no doubt, but his inability to link the play efficiently with his back to goal definitely hampers our attacks. Some may say, well, Amorim can develop Højlund into what Gyökeres was at Sporting, but that's not how it works. Realistically, Højlund at his age is going to need another 2, 3, or even more years to get to that level. It isn't going to happen overnight. But people will say that when Højlund is Gyökeres' age, he can be just as good as him. Okay, but he's a few years away from that. So just logically, if we can get the player that Højlund could potentially be in a few years, this summer, for around the same price, maybe £10 million more at the most, I honestly can't see a reason why we wouldn't do that. And this is purely out of emotion because you are fond of Højlund. It's Manchester United FC, not Højlund FC. Gyökeres is a far more complete player, levels above Højlund when it comes to dealing with direct passes into his feet or chest, under pressure with his back to goal. He retains possession a lot better, is a far better dribbler and ball carrier, and is without doubt a better goal scorer and chance creator than Højlund. So to me it just seems like a no-brainer. Let's assume that Gyökeres costs £10 million more than we get for Højlund, just for argument's sake. That would still only take our net spend to around £90 to £100 million. Add on Alvaro Fernandez if we do sign him in January, that would take us to just over £100 million net, which is still on budget. The £100 million net spend is just a rough figure, it doesn't have to be exact. Now from here, what we really should be doing is selling Rashford, at least £50 million I'm saying, either to Bayern, who will probably lose Sane and maybe also Gnabry in the summer, or PSG. Even if it's not one of those two, you've still got clubs like AC Milan if they sell Leao for big money, Napoli when they sell Osimhen, Inter if they sell Thuram, or even Newcastle if they sell Isaac, which would actually open up the opportunity of a pretty good swap deal. If Isaac is valued at about £90 million, Rashford should be about £40 million less, around £50 million, and Isaac would be my number one option. Now Ineos would have to dip into their budget for 2026, which is definitely doable, as it would only be an extra 40, maybe £50 million on top of the net spend of around 100 to 110 million. And with the way that accounting works, using instalments and amortisation, a club like Manchester United, who constantly brags about having the best in class behind the scenes, should be able to do this. And it would make sense bringing in both Isaac and Gyökeres this summer, as for what would be a combined £50 million net spend after selling Rashford and Højlund, this is going to mean that we don't have to spend as much money in 2026. Now I think that makes perfect sense, even though I'm no accountant obviously, but even if it wasn't possible, I just knocked the £35 million Teo deal on the head, keep Dalot and Alvaro Fernandez as the two left wing back options, and then use that money to upgrade Rashford for Isaac. So it's still very much doable. And whilst this would be ambitious, signing Alvaro Fernandez in January for around £16 million, after selling him for somewhere between 5 to 10 million in the summer, Frimpong and Walton for around £110 million combined, maybe Teo for 35 million, even though I would be willing to not do that deal if we absolutely had to, and then using the Rashford and Højlund money to finance deals for Isaac and Gyökeres can't be categorised as unrealistic for a club like Manchester United, or something that's only possible in Football Manager or FIFA. It's just not. Especially when you're looking at what other top clubs are able to do. We aren't being controlled in the transfer market by the Glazers, so don't hold Ineos to those standards. This is perfectly realistic, even if it is certainly ambitious. So for confirmation, Højlund and Rashford bring in £100 million, Sancho 25, Anthony 20, 25 million for Malacia and Shaw, along with Casemiro, Eriksen, Lindelof and maybe Harry Maguire all off the wage bill as well. That's £170 million brought in, or at least around that figure, as well as around £60 to £80 million off of the wage bill. And this isn't even factoring in players like Bayindir and some of the youth players as well. Isaac and Gyökeres for a combined £155 million I would say, Wharton and Frimpong for 110, as well as Alvaro Fernandez in January for £16 million, takes us into the region of £280 million, which is a net spend of £110 million, and if the money was there I'd also bring in Theo Hernandez of course. That would be about £30 to £35 million on top, but I have sectioned that transfer off as a maybe just because I did say I'd have a net spend of around £100 million. This video is getting quite long, so I'll break down how this team would function tactically, as well as some of the other benefits of players I've signed, and who we should be targeting in 2026 and beyond in another video, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the bell for notifications, and you can also check out my Patreon, which I'll leave on the end screen now.